Okay, today we are going to read the book of Esther. This should be, honestly, after everything we've been through, this should be pretty simple and straightforward. Esther is not a difficult book. It is not a heavy doctrinal book. It is not a prophecy book. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's a history, it's a story, it's meant to tell a story about a series of events that happened in a somewhat entertaining fashion. This is one of the few parts of the Bible that could be considered like to have been written at least partially for entertainment purposes. Its primary theological purpose is to describe where one of the non-Moses sanctioned Jewish feasts came from. The Feast of Purim. That's its primary theological purpose. But it'll be pretty simple. Compared to what we've been through lately, this one is going to be not too difficult. As always, though, we need to go over some of the background here to help understand what's going on. Esther is the name of the queen character who appears in the book, who became the queen of one of the Persian kings that we're going to call Xerxes. That is his Greek name. Much easier to pronounce, at least to my tongue, than his Persian or Hebrew names. His Hebrew name, which you might find written in some Bibles, is something like Ahasuerus or something like that. And his Persian name is even harder to pronounce. I don't think you're going to find that written in any Bibles, really. It's something like Akshak Yarwan Shakasa or something like that. I don't know. I honestly struggle with it. So Xerxes will do. Xerxes will do. This is the guy spoken of briefly in Daniel 11:2 about you remember Daniel 11 when the being that I believe is pre-incarnate Jesus comes to Daniel to give him a vision for the future and explain the vision that Daniel had already had. And he starts off talking about the king of Persia, the kingdom of Persia, before quickly switching to Greece. And he says that after the current guy, or after this guy, 3 more kings will arise. And, this is actually the third of those kings. And the fourth of them, the fourth one's oil is going to be far richer than them all. This is actually that guy. Xerxes is that fourth, far richer king. And we're going to see that reflected here in the book of Esther. Xerxes reigned from 486 to 465 BC. He is the son of Darius, the guy we read about in Haggai and Zechariah in the early part of Ezra. He's that guy's son. He also will have a son named Artaxerxes, who will become king in the time of Nehemiah later on. Darius had started so one of the big things that's going on here during this time period is Persia has conquered the Babylonian Empire, and then it conquers Egypt. Cyrus's son Cambyses conquers Egypt, and then they turn their attention to Greece. They made contact with Greek city-states way back in the reign of Cyrus. Cyrus, before he conquered Babylonia, he went up into what we now call Turkey and conquered that region. Then he went down to Babylonia and conquered Babylonia. And in the process of doing that, he conquered a handful of Greek city-states in western Turkey. And that is what brought the Persians into contact with Greeks. And for the next 100 years or so, they're going to be fighting. And then eventually, 200 years from now, in the days of Alexander the Great, the Greeks are going to come and take vengeance on the Persians and conquer them in retaliation for all the aggression they suffered at the hands of the Persians 100 years earlier. The Persians were never really able to conquer Greece. They took some of the city-states from time to time. They took some of the territories, but Greece is pretty far away from Persia. Okay? So they were never able to maintain control over Greece to any great degree. And they kept it up for a number of years before finally cooling off. This guy, Xerxes, his dad started the invasion against Greece, and this guy is going to be continuing it. Neither of them actually conquers Greece. In fact, Xerxes eventually has to retreat. That happens actually in between Esther chapter 1 and Esther chapter 2. The book of Esther makes no mention of any of that. But that's going on in the background at the beginning of the book of Esther. And it's part of the reason why when Xerxes wants a new wife in Esther 2, he wants to take solace in his women, because he just got back from getting his butt kicked by Greece, basically. We don't really have much in the way of Persian records. Yeah, this book talks about a history of the records of the kings of Media and Persia, which is lost to us. We don't have it anymore. So most of what we know about the Persian Empire comes from either the Bible itself or from what the Greeks wrote about them. And of course, the Greeks are their enemies, so they're not necessarily always 100% reliable. So we don't know exactly how some of this stuff fits into the greater scheme of Xerxes' reign, because the Greek writers who recorded Xerxes' reign didn't see fit to include this. In particular, we don't really know where the queen situation comes in. Okay, the queen that we know about that is referred to in the Greek writers is a lady named Amistress, or Amistress, how you pronounce it, which doesn't seem to correspond to Esther or Vashti, his original queen here. It probably was Vashti. It was not Esther. I don't believe there's any way, even though the names Amistress and Esther are more similar than the names Amistress and Vashti. I think it's a much higher likelihood that Amistress was Vashti, because what we know about her from other sources doesn't seem to indicate that she could possibly have been Esther. So Vashti may not even have been a name. It could be one of those things. I think it means beauty, so it could just be one of those things where the writer is calling her Queen Beauty. It might not even have been a name. So we can't identify exactly who Vashti is, and we can't identify exactly who Esther may have been outside the Bible. The other major character in the Bible is a guy named Mordecai, and his name does appear in Persian records around that time. His Mordecai is a Babylonian name after their main god Marduk, and there is a scribe in the court of Xerxes, a scribe called Mardukiah, which is probably Mordecai. So we do have some evidence of him, at least. This material covers the reign of Xerxes from near the beginning of his reign down to a little bit later on. And time-wise, we're covering the years 483 to 473, or something like that, BC. This is in between the building of the temple in Jerusalem and the arrival of Ezra and then later Nehemiah to Jerusalem. That's why we're reading this now. The story does not take place in Jerusalem. It takes place in Persia. It takes place in the Persian capital of Susa, which is east of Babylon. And that's where the story takes place. So we're not going to be focusing on Jerusalem here. This is going to be a look into the way the Persian Jews lived. Those who did not go back to the land of Judah after the exile and stayed wherever they were, like Mordecai and Esther. That's about it. This is actually an interesting book in that, in a way, now it is one of the later books of the Old Testament. The only events that take place after this are those at the end of Ezra and Nehemiah. So it's the third. I don't know when Malachi was written. It was written sometime around this time. But in terms of events, in terms of a record of events, this is the third latest record of events in the Old Testament, with only Ezra 7 through 10 and Nehemiah taking place after this. So that's one thing, but another way, this book is actually kind of the most modern book in the Old Testament, in the sense that we never hear God's name mentioned. And that's on purpose. I believe it's very clear that the writer, whoever it was, whether it was Mordecai or somebody after him who wrote this stuff down, intentionally never mentioned the Jewish God. I think partly because they were presenting it as a Persian court history, possibly. And I think mainly because the lack of referring to God was actually the point. Without referring to God, it actually kind of highlights his involvement in the events even more, in a way, because it shows that all these random coincidences and occurrences that took place in Esther happened because of divine providence. God's hand was on all these things, even if none of the characters explicitly spoke his name. There is a reference to divine providence in the book, but his name, God's name, is not actually mentioned. And that is actually kind of like God today. So there is no prophet of God. There's no direct word from God. Mordecai and Esther do not get instructions straight from God about how to handle their situation. There is no prophet that comes along and talks to Mordecai or Esther about what to do. There's no even recorded consulting of the Word of God. There's no recorded consulting of the Torah or anything like that. Now, there is a spot where Mordecai and Esther fast for 3 days, and their people fast. Presumably, also, they would be praying during this time. There was consulting God for guidance, although the text does not actually say that. Now, I'll get to that in a minute. So that is an aspect of Esther that is very interesting, because that's how God operates today. God does not send prophets to us today. He does not speak directly through the mouths of men today. He's already done that. He's left a message behind for us to read and consult if we seek it, if we wish to. And so in that sense, Esther is one of the most modern books, really the entire Bible, because this reflects the way God has operated in the world, basically since around this time, with the exception of that period of time in the 1st century AD when he sent his son and then established his church and spoke through the mouths of the apostles and the prophets at that time. But other than that, since about 400 BC, God has allowed his already spoken word and written down for us to satisfy our need for insight and revelation from him. And so Esther is a reflection of that. So the way that Esther lives and Mordecai lives is the way that we live today. We can pray and fast and consult God, but whatever insight we get from him doesn't come from the mouth of a prophet directly today, like it did in that time. Esther is because there is no mention of God in the Hebrew text, Esther is a very disputed book. And it always has been. This is not a new common thing. Esther has always been difficult, even for the Jewish rabbis, to accept, because there is no mention of God in it. And so there are actually many versions of Esther, but we're going to boil it down to two distinct editions of the book of Esther. You have the all Hebrew text, which is what I just got done talking about, never mentions God. And that's what we're going to find and read here in this Bible today. Then you have kind of a sort of expanded text with Greek additions that were included at some later point in time by somebody. And that fills out certain parts of the story in the narrative, and basically it's there to explain, it's basically there to do two things. It's there to insert the name of God into the story where it otherwise isn't present. And it's also there to paint Esther and Mordecai in a different picture than what we get in the actual Hebrew text. And I'll talk about that kind of as I go. I have read the expanded version of Esther in the past. I don't have easy access to a physical copy of it, like it's not in this Bible I read or any of the others I have lying around. Because it's part of the Apocrypha. Okay, if you have a Bible that has the Apocrypha in it, it would have the expanded Esther in it. And I have read it in the past, and it's available online. I mean, I could go to Google right now and type in a search bar and get access to it. But it's not, I think, inspired. I don't think it actually belongs in the inspired text of Esther, so I'm not going to do that. Although I will point out some of the differences in that compared to the version of text that we've got. Again, like I said, primarily the apocryphal additions to Esther do two things. They include the name of God, whereas otherwise it isn't mentioned, and they paint Mordecai and Esther in a different light. To make them look both, more, suffering victims sort of thing. So we'll talk about that as we go. And like I said, because there is no mention of God, this has always been a disputed book, even in the rabbinical circles of the ancient past. And so this is to the degree where someone at some point felt the need. I have a cat who's right here and is about to pounce on me. That's why I'm distracted. To the point where someone somewhere along the line felt the need to actually expand on a book to address those issues. To address those issues. That's about it, I think, for now. That's the intro to Esther. We should be able to get all through this in one day. It's only 10 chapters, and actually it's only really 9. 10 chapters, like 2 sentences. and we should be able to get all through this in one day. It's not a heavy doctrinal book. It's not a heavy theological book. It's not a heavy prophetic book. We won't really need to stop and explain lots of different things like we do with those prophetic books. This is going to be kind of a breath of fresh air after spending so much time immersed in these prophets. And this is going to be a lot more simple and straightforward, and what you see is what you get sort of thing with this. There'll be a few things we'll have to look at. There'll be a few aspects of it that we'll have to kind of draw out from the rest of the Old Testament to understand fully what's going on, but not nearly to the degree that we've been doing with these other prophetic books we've been reading lately.